Stop assuming reincarnation is the reward. Stop treating it like a graduation certificate handed out after every life. Seth said something that most people in this space quietly walk past because it does not fit the story they want to believe. He said there are 3 types of souls that do not return, not because they failed, not because something went wrong, but because the cycle itself, completed and continuing, would be a step backward, not forward. I want to show you what that actually means. I have spent years sitting with this material. I have read the sessions, traced the logic, followed the implications, and I can tell you this. The souls Seth described are not rare exceptions or spiritual elite. They are a category. They follow a pattern. And understanding that pattern changes how you see every life, including the one you are living right now. This is not a comfort story. It is a structural explanation. Let us begin. You have heard the idea before. You live, you die. You come back, you live again. The wheel keeps turning. And somewhere inside that model, most people locate a kind of safety, a guarantee that nothing is ever truly final, that mistakes get corrected in the next round, that consciousness is always given another chance. I am not saying that model is wrong. I am saying it is incomplete. Seth was precise about this. He did not teach reincarnation as a conveyor belt. He did not describe it as an automatic process that runs regardless of what the soul has or has not accomplished. What Seth described was a purposeful system. Consciousness enters physical reality with specific intentions. It chooses a body, a time, a set of conditions. It does this because physical reality offers something that cannot be obtained any other way. Here is the part most teachers skip. Physical reality is a learning environment, not a permanent residence, not the final form of existence. It is a specific kind of school, one that uses contrast, limitation, and time sequencing to generate a quality of self-knowledge that is simply not available in non-physical states. When you do not have a body, you do not experience resistance. You do not bump into walls. You do not feel hunger or loss or the particular weight of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when nothing is going right and you have to decide what kind of person you are going to be anyway. That friction is the mechanism. The difficulty is not a design flaw. It is the entire point. So the soul comes back again and again, not because it is trapped, but because it is still extracting value from the system. Each life adds a layer of understanding that could not be generated any other way. And when the soul has extracted what physical reality uniquely offers, the mechanism changes. This is where Seth's account diverges sharply from popular belief. Most spiritual frameworks treat non-return as a failure state or an elite achievement available only to enlightened masters after decades of disciplined practice. Seth rejected both of those framings completely. He described non-return not as an escape from the cycle, but as the natural completion of what the cycle was designed to accomplish. Think of it like this. I used to repair radios and televisions. When a circuit is functioning correctly, the signal passes through and does what it is meant to do. You do not keep running current through a completed circuit trying to improve it. The work is done. The energy moves on. Forcing more current through a completed system does not produce a better signal. It produces damage. The soul that no longer needs physical experience is not failing to reincarnate. It is operating correctly. The system worked. But here is what I find most significant, and this is something I have turned over many times in my own thinking. Seth was not vague about the categories. He was specific. There are not infinite reasons a soul might stop returning. There are patterns. There are types. And identifying those types tells you something important about what consciousness is actually doing across all these lifetimes. Why does that matter to you right now? Because you are not watching this by accident. Something in the material pulled you here. And I've observed after years of sitting with people who are drawn to this kind of content that the ones who find these questions most urgent are usually the ones closest to understanding their own position in the process. I am not saying you're about to stop reincarnating. I am saying the question is worth examining seriously rather than romantically. Seth distinguished 3 specific categories of souls that do not return to physical existence. Each category arrives at non-return through a completely different mechanism. And each one, when you examine it clearly, reveals something about what this entire system of lives is actually for. Let us go through them not as mythology, not as reassurance, but as a structural account of how consciousness actually works, according to one of the most detailed non-physical sources ever recorded. The first category is the one almost no one talks about, and it is the most misunderstood. There is a version of this idea that gets corrupted almost immediately when people encounter it. The corruption sounds like this: certain souls are more evolved, more advanced, spiritually superior, and that superiority is what earns them the exit from the cycle. Seth did not say that. What Seth described for the first category of non-returning souls is not superiority, it is completion. Those are not the same thing. Here is the distinction. A student who has finished a course is not superior to a student who is still in the middle of it. They are simply at a different point in the process. The course itself does not rank participants. It moves them through a sequence. When the sequence is complete, the student does not attend more classes to prove they deserve the certificate. They leave, not because they won, because they finish. The first type of soul that Seth described as non-returning is one that has moved through enough physical lives to have extracted what physical reality is uniquely designed to provide. Not perfection, completion. This is a crucial difference. Perfection implies a standard that must be met. Completion implies a purpose that has been fulfilled. Seth was explicit. Consciousness does not seek perfection through physical incarnation. It seeks experience. Specifically, it seeks the kind of experience that is only possible when you are embedded in a system of cause and effect that operates through time, in a body that registers sensation, in a world where your choices have consequences that unfold slowly and cannot be immediately revised. I want to be precise about what Seth meant by completion here. He was not describing a soul that had lived a perfect life, or even many good ones. He was describing a soul that had accumulated enough contrast, enough encounters with its own limitations, enough genuine choices made under real conditions that the learning curve specific to physical reality had flattened out. There was nothing new. The physical environment could show it. When that happens, continuing to incarnate does not accelerate growth, it just adds redundancy. Now, I have seen this concept misused. I have watched people decide they must be in this category as a way of avoiding the discomfort of the life they are currently living. That is not what Seth meant. The completion he described is not a feeling. It is not a preference. You do not graduate from physical reality by deciding you are done with it. The process is not voluntary in that sense. What Seth described was more like a threshold that consciousness crosses when the density of its accumulated experience reaches a certain quality, not quantity, quality. A soul could theoretically live many lives and still be early in the process if those lives were spent in avoidance, in shallow engagement, in deliberate withdrawal from the full friction of physical experience. Conversely, certain lives lived with full intensity, full engagement, full willingness to be changed by what happens, can accomplish in one pass what might otherwise take many. This is the part I find most clarifying about Seth's model. He shifted the question away from how many lives you have lived and toward what you did with the lives you had. The mechanism is not accumulation. It is depth. And what happens to these souls when they complete the curriculum? Seth said they do not simply rest. They do not dissolve. They continue, but in modes of experience and creativity that are not available inside the physical system. He described these souls as moving into states of consciousness where they can operate with far greater scope, contributing to the development of other systems, participating in creative processes of a scale that physical existence simply cannot contain. He used language carefully here. He did not describe it as heaven. He did not describe it as an end. He described it as a different kind of beginning one that requires the full foundation that physical lives were building toward. The gift in this category is not relief from difficulty. The gift is that the difficulty was never random. Every life, every hard thing, every choice made in the dark when no one was watching, all of it was building something specific. And when enough of it has been built, the next phase opens. That is not a punishment, that is a design. But the first category is only one of three. And the second one is where Seth's account becomes genuinely uncomfortable because it involves souls that do not return for reasons that have nothing to do with completion. I want to be careful here. This is the part of Seth's material that gets either sensationalized or ignored entirely. Sensationalized by people who want a metaphysical horror story. Ignored by people who cannot reconcile it with the idea of a loving universe. I am going to do neither. I am going to describe exactly what Seth said and let the logic stand on its own. The second category of souls that Seth described as not returning to physical reality are those that across many lives systematically refused the core work that physical existence is designed to produce. Not fail, refuse. This is the distinction that matters. Failure inside the system is expected. Failure is part of the curriculum. You choose badly. You hurt someone. You waste a life. You arrive at death knowing you missed something. That is not disqualifying. That is information. The soul absorbs it, carries it forward, and enters the next life with that understanding as part of its foundation. What Seth described in this second category is something different. It is a pattern of deliberate contraction, a repeated turning away from the specific kind of growth that physical lives make possible. Not in one life, not in two, but as a consistent orientation across enough lives that the contraction becomes, in a sense, structural. Here is the clearest way I can state it. Physical reality is designed to generate one thing above all others: the experience of being a self in genuine relationship with other selves under conditions of real consequence. That is the engine of the whole system. You have a body, other people have bodies. Things happen between you that cannot be undone. You are changed by those things. They are changed by those things. The record of those changes is what growth actually is. A soul that consistently across life after life withdraws from genuine connection, manipulates rather than engages, contracts rather than expands, uses the physical environment purely for self-insulation rather than growth. That soul is, in a technical sense, running the machine without producing what the machine is designed to produce. Seth was not describing this as moral punishment. That framing misses the point entirely. He was describing a functional outcome. The soul that consistently refuses the curriculum does not get punished by the system. It simply reaches a point where the system has nothing left to offer it, not because it completed the curriculum, but because it successfully avoided engaging with it deeply enough for the mechanism to function. At that point, Seth described a different kind of transition. The soul does not continue forward in the way that completing souls do. It does not move into expanded creative states. What Seth described was closer to a dissolution, a return to undifferentiated consciousness, a folding back into the larger field of being from which individual consciousness emerges, where the particular configuration of that soul, the particular self it had been building across lifetimes, does not persist in the way it would for a completing soul. Now, before you apply this to someone you know, stop. That impulse is exactly the wrong use of this information. I have seen this material weaponized. I have seen people use Seth's description of this category to label people they dislike, to construct metaphysical hierarchies, to excuse their own withdrawal from difficult relationships by diagnosing the other person as a lost soul. That is not what Seth was teaching. He was describing a structural phenomenon, a possibility within the system, not a category you can assign to others from the outside. What you can do with it, the only genuinely useful application, is ask yourself an honest question about your own pattern. Not in this life, in the orientation you recognize across your experience. Are you moving toward genuine encounter with the friction this reality offers? Or are you systematically finding ways to insulate yourself from it while maintaining the appearance of engagement? That is a question only you can answer, and it requires the kind of honesty that is itself a form of the growth Seth was describing. The second category is uncomfortable precisely because it is not about dramatic evil. It is about consistent, low-grade avoidance, the quiet refusal to be fully here, the permanent reservation of one portion of yourself that never commits, never risks, never actually enters the room. Seth said that pattern, sustained long enough, has a consequence not as punishment, but as physics. The third category is different from both of these, and in some ways it is the most remarkable of the three because it describes souls that do not return, not because they completed something or refused something, but because they made a deliberate choice from a place of genuine understanding. I want to be precise about what Seth meant here, because this third category is easy to misread. It sounds, on the surface, like spiritual achievement, like graduation. And in one sense, it is. But Seth was careful about something that most people who summarize his work tend to skip over. And I think that omission changes everything. The third type of soul that does not return is one that has reached a point of what Seth called genuine volitional exit, not exhaustion, not completion in the tidy sense, but a conscious, informed, freely chosen decision to move into a different mode of existence entirely, a mode that no longer requires physical incarnation as its primary vehicle for growth. Now stop there for a moment, because that phrase "no longer requires physical incarnation" is doing a lot of work. Seth was not saying these souls are done growing. He was not saying they have learned everything there is to learn. He was saying something more precise than that. He was saying that the particular mechanism of physical life, the forgetting, the friction, the resistance of matter, the shock of limitation, is no longer the most efficient or appropriate environment for what they are working on next. Think about that like a craftsman who has moved past the need for a particular tool. You do not throw the tool away because it is bad. You set it down because you are doing different work now. I have sat with that idea for a long time, and what strikes me is how non-sentimental it is. There is no trophy. There is no ceremony. There is simply a recognition, interior, clear, undramatic, that the next phase of development requires a different kind of stage. Seth described this as a transition into what he called pure mental or energy existence. Not heaven in the religious sense, not some reward state, but a condition of being in which consciousness operates without the scaffolding of a physical body, without the filtering mechanism of a biological nervous system, without the sequential time structure that shapes every human experience. And here is what I find genuinely interesting about this. Seth said that from within that state, these consciousnesses do not lose their individuality. They do not dissolve into some undifferentiated unity. They remain themselves, but they are no longer constrained by the particular rules of this dimension, the one direction, flow of time, the opacity of other minds, the gap between intention and manifestation that defines physical reality. In physical life, you think something and then you have to work to make it real. There is friction between the inner and the outer. That friction, Seth said, is not a flaw in the system. It is the point of the system. It is what forces development. It is what makes physical incarnation useful. But for a consciousness that has genuinely integrated that friction, that has, through repeated incarnations, developed the full range of capacities that the physical arena trains, the friction stops being instructive. It becomes redundant. And at that point, continuing to reincarnate would be the equivalent of a surgeon going back to medical school to retake anatomy. Not harmful, just unnecessary. Now, I want to be honest about something. When I first encountered this framework, my immediate reaction was skepticism. Not about the metaphysics. I had already worked through most of that. My skepticism was about the human tendency to claim this category for oneself prematurely. I have met people who decided they were done with the physical plane long before they had genuinely engaged with it. People for whom the idea of not returning was, in practice, another form of the second category, the avoidant soul, dressed up in the language of transcendence. Seth was clear about this distinction, and the distinction matters. The soul that genuinely exits the reincarnational cycle from this third position does so with full engagement behind them, not despite having been here, but because of it. The exit is earned, not by escaping the work, but by completing it not perfectly, not without error, but with genuine presence and participation across the full arc of what physical existence offers. This is why Seth described it as a gift, not a reward, a gift. The difference is important. A reward is external, given to you by someone else for performance. A gift is simply what arrives when the conditions are right. When the timing is right, when you are ready, not because you earned it, but because you genuinely are it. And that distinction between earning and becoming is something I keep returning to because it reframes the entire purpose of incarnation. You are not here to accumulate enough merit to leave. You are here to become something. And when the becoming is sufficient, the leaving is simply what happens next. Most teachings about reincarnation frame it as a ladder. You climb, you rise, you eventually reach the top and stop climbing. Seth rejected that model entirely. And I think this is where his framework becomes genuinely unusual, even among the metaphysical traditions that share his vocabulary. Seth did not describe the end of reincarnation as an ascent. He described it as an expansion, not moving up, moving out, into a wider field of operation that includes physical reality but is not limited to it. Let me explain what I mean by that. Because the distinction is not cosmetic. If you imagine the reincarnational cycle as a ladder, then the soul at the top has left the lower rungs behind. Physical life becomes something beneath it, something it has graduated from, something lesser. That framing produces a particular relationship to physical existence, a kind of impatience with it, a sense that being here is a problem to be solved rather than a process to be inhabited. Seth saw that attitude itself as a misunderstanding. And I agree with him on this, not because I was told to, but because I have observed what that attitude produces in people. I have watched people spend entire decades trying to transcend an experience they never actually had, trying to leave a room they never fully entered. The expansion model is different. In the expansion model, the consciousness that moves beyond physical reincarnation does not leave physical reality behind in the sense of discarding it. It integrates it. Everything that was learned through the friction and limitation and density of physical life becomes part of the structure of what that consciousness now is. The physical is not abandoned. It is metabolized. And this is precisely why Seth called the exit from reincarnation a gift rather than a reward or an achievement. A gift implies that something has been given to you that you can now carry forward. The gift is not the exit itself. The gift is what the entire cycle, every life, every limitation, every difficulty deposited into the core of your consciousness along the way. You are not escaping the physical plane. You are carrying it with you, transformed as part of your permanent structure. Now, Seth also said something about this that I find particularly important in the context of the three categories. He said the gift aspect of not returning applies differently depending on which category a soul belongs to. For the first category, the soul that genuinely completes the cycle through full engagement, the gift is straightforward, the fruit of the whole process. Everything the physical arena was designed to cultivate, now fully integrated and available for whatever comes next. For the third category, the soul that makes a conscious volitional choice to exit the gift is similar but with an added dimension. Seth suggested these souls often carry a particular kind of clarity about the nature of consciousness itself, a clarity that was earned not just through individual lifetimes, but through the moment of clear-eyed, awake choosing. The act of conscious departure, done with genuine understanding, is itself a form of development, a final integration. But here is the part that surprised me when I first encountered it. Seth said the second category, the souls that resist that fragment, that sustain the pattern of avoidance long enough that reincarnation becomes inaccessible to them. He said even for them, in the long arc, there is something that functions like a gift, not immediately, not comfortably, but eventually, because the discontinuation of the reincarnational process forces a reckoning, a confrontation with the accumulated pattern. And that confrontation, however difficult, is itself a form of the work that the physical arena was trying to accomplish all along the meeting of the self, without the possibility of further evasion. Seth was not romantic about this. He was not saying that destruction leads automatically to growth. He was saying something more careful, that even in the worst outcome of the reincarnational process, the fundamental nature of consciousness, which is oriented toward growth, does not disappear. It is interrupted, disrupted, diverted into a much longer and more difficult path. but not extinguished. I find that genuinely important. Not because it makes the second category less serious. It is serious, and I want to be clear about that. But because it situates the entire framework within a larger view of what consciousness actually is. Seth's position was that the orientation toward growth, toward expansion, toward greater coherence and integration is not something you achieve. It is what you are made of. You can resist it. You can complicate it. You can delay it by centuries or longer. But you cannot ultimately abolish it, because it is not a feature of your consciousness. It is the nature of consciousness itself. And that, I think, is the deepest reason Seth used the word gift. Not just for those who exit gracefully, but for the entire cycle, for the whole architecture. I want to bring this back to something practical, because everything Seth taught, and I mean this without exception, was ultimately addressed to the present moment, to the life happening right now, to the choices being made in this body, in this time, in the specific circumstances you are currently navigating. So let me ask you something directly, not rhetorically. Actually ask yourself this. When you examine the texture of how you are living, not the events, not the circumstances, but the texture, which of these three categories do you recognize? Do you recognize the soul that is genuinely here, engaged, present, willing to be shaped by the friction, taking the difficulty as information rather than evidence of failure? Or do you recognize something closer to the second pattern, the permanent partial commitment, the self held slightly in reserve, the life that is technically being lived but never quite inhabited? Most people, if they are honest, recognize elements of both. And I think that is exactly the right answer. Because the categories are not identities. They are tendencies, patterns, directions of movement. And the value of naming them is not to diagnose yourself once and file the result away. It is to make the pattern visible enough that you can do something about it today, in the actual conditions of your actual life. Seth was insistent on this. The physical plane is not a waiting room. It is not a test you endure until something better arrives. It is the specific environment that your consciousness chose, and I mean chose in a meaningful sense, not metaphorically precisely, because it provides something that no other environment provides in quite the same way. The resistance, the opacity, the gap between what you intend and what manifests. That gap is not the enemy. That gap is the curriculum. Now, I have referenced in other videos on this channel, including the work we covered when we explored what Seth said about why you chose your exact parents, this consistent thread in Seth's teaching, that the physical life is not happening to you. It is being generated by a version of you that operates at a level of awareness your waking mind does not have direct access to. And the life you are living reflects that deeper layer of intention, not the surface layer of conscious preference. That is a difficult idea to sit with, because it means that the aspects of your life that feel most accidental, most unwanted, most outside your control, those too are part of a design. Not a punitive design, not a random one, a purposeful one, generated by the part of you that agreed to show up here and work with exactly these materials. And if that is true, if the physical life is genuinely a chosen curriculum, then the question changes. You stop asking why this is happening to me. You start asking, what is this teaching me that I apparently came here to learn? That shift is not easy. I am not going to tell you it is easy. I have had moments in my own life where that framework felt completely unavailable, where the weight of what was happening made the idea of chosen curriculum feel like an insult rather than a framework. I understand why people resist it. But resistance does not make it false. And understanding does not require that every moment feels tolerable. It simply requires that you hold the larger view, even when the immediate view is difficult, especially then. Seth's three categories of souls that do not return are not really a taxonomy of spiritual outcomes. They are a map of three different relationships to the same fundamental material. The material is this physical life, with all its limitation, all its density, all its capacity for both suffering and transformation. The relationship you bring to that material determines everything. The soul that engages fully that allows itself to be changed by what it encounters, that stays present through the friction, that soul is moving toward the first category, not by trying to graduate, by actually being here. The soul that withholds, that manages from a distance, that hedges its presence, that soul is moving toward the second category. Not because it is evil, because it is afraid. And fear, sustained long enough without being met, has structural consequences. The soul that reaches a genuine, eyes open, fully informed choice to exit the cycle entirely, that soul has arrived somewhere real. But it arrived there through full engagement, not through avoidance dressed as wisdom. The question Seth was really asking, and I believe it is the question this entire framework was designed to place in your hands, is not which category you will end up in. That is too large and too distant to be useful right now. The question is, in this life, in this moment, are you actually here? Not performing presence, not narrating the experience from a safe distance, actually here, in the body, in the circumstance, in contact with the full weight and texture of what this particular life contains. Because that is where the work is. That is where it has always been. And the universe, as Seth described it, patient, non-punitive, oriented toward growth as its fundamental nature, that universe is not watching to see if you get it right. It is waiting to see if you show up. Show up.